All right, well, good morning, everybody. I'm Jeff Branham, and to my left and your right is Kirk Etheridge, and to my right and your left is Phillip. And Phillip, remind me of your last name.
Bremerman. I was hoping he
Bremerman.
was going to try it.
And we drafted Phillip literally 30 seconds ago, right? Our goal is to do the introduction in less than 9 takes, and best Greg Armstrong, even in his drug-stated mind, according to Hillary. Greg was on some heavy medication. So if we can get our introduction in less than 9 takes, we're way ahead, right? But we're really excited. I'm excited to be here. We're focusing on Romans chapter 12, and this may be a little bit of a different approach. We're just going to kind of have a roundtable discussion, share some of our own thoughts, share kind of what the verses mean to us, but also kind of put it in a real life application to where hopefully 2020 in Locust Fork, Alabama, we can carry the message out to those that need it, and then again we can use it as a renewing. We'll go ahead and say that since it's chapter 12, a renewing of our relationship with Christ. First off, it's Mother's Day. Kirk and I, we want to wish everybody happy Mother's Day. And it's kind of interesting. I was thinking on the way over here, my mom passed away, this past October. And it's kind of neat, though, when you think about it, that it's really her first Mother's Day back reunited, kind of with her mom and aunts and my dad's mom and all those types of things. So, while it's sad here, I can only imagine, what that's like one day. I'm not smart enough. I know you're not smart enough
That's
to really
cool
put
thought.
that in there. But, that's the one thing, certainly happy Mother's Day to your mom.
87.
87. I would have never thought. I would get 67 closer. You look closer
She'll
to
like
87
you
than
for
she
that.
does. Yeah. But it's amazing to me, Kirk. Your mom is, very attractive, eloquent, well-spoken. Your dad, a nice-looking guy, well-spoken.
Here I am.
What happened, Kirk? I mean, what's the deal with that?
Go figure.
Yeah, go figure is right. So anyway, again, we're in Romans chapter 12. Really starting out in verse 1. And again, the theme that Paul, and I'll let you kind of address it, Kirk. You had the nice reaction. What nice game face there, Kirk. From a transition where we are in Romans and kind of where we are in the book, chapter 12.
Okay, so Romans up to here, Paul has been teaching and talking to the Romans about the importance of salvation, why we need it, and how to obtain it. And now he's kind of changed gears, and it's more how we live out our salvation. So I'm going to say he's talking to the Romans and us as Christians. We're saved, and so we've kind of changed gears. So it's maybe kind of like a turning point in Romans when you get to 12, so it's kind of a good point.
Right, kind of an application. Again, really kind of how to walk out your faith.
There you go.
One thing we talked about before we started taping, we want to make sure that this is not a measuring stick of how saved we are, or are we doing better or are we doing worse. Certainly, chapter 8, the lesson that I had before, we are without question secured. And we use the illustration, from an adoption perspective in Randy and his little girl, that she was fully adopted, she was fully a part, of their family, even though she hadn't necessarily received all the benefits of that adoption yet, right? Which is kind of a cool deal, is that we're fully adopted into the family, and now we are walking that faith out, right? And so Paul's talking about, one of the interesting things is that the way that we do that is through the renewing of our mind, right? And so it really paints the portrait of a continuation, a continual renewing of really how we think, right? And that we come from very different backgrounds at times. Some people have more, mental renewal to do. Me and you had a lot more mental renewal possibly than Phillip from a salvation
Probably
standpoint of where we were. But there's a constant, really a balancing that, again, of going to God from our standpoint of understanding, as Paul mentioned, through the mercies that he received, right? And again, we talked about, Paul was literally a Christian killer, but he received mercy from God, and because of that mercy, he really had became, and again, Paul definitely lived this out, if anybody did. He became a living sacrifice, but also was instructing the Romans, but also the folks of Locust Fork to become a living sacrifice. And again, I would kind of throw that both out to you guys from a standpoint of, how would you describe what it means to be a living sacrifice, even in the year 2020, again, that we're going to carry this out on a day-to-day basis, person to person?
All right, for me, I don't know if this is the exact answer you're looking for, but I thought of so many of our lessons and so many of the things you've said, Brother Rufus has said in sermons. It goes to those three words: die to self. And so I made that note, and I have to keep notes. But to me, I just thought that's what popped in my mind immediately. And I'm not talking at anyone. I should be looking in a mirror here, because I struggle with that. I'm just selfish by nature. I put me and mine first all the time. So I don't mean it to sound like that, like I have accomplished that. But Paul said at whatever point, pick up your cross daily. And I just thought of all that. So for me, I just think this is another lesson along those same lines. That as hard as it is, if we got God first and then others before us, we can't really go wrong. So I don't know if that's what
I think again that if we could all live with the daily motto of death to self today and others first, through the Spirit, I think we're way ahead. Any thoughts?
I just thought when you said sacrifice, I kind of always go back to that Old Testament. Something had to lose its life in order to atone, right? And so if you use your illustration, which I think you're spot on, if you die to self, so you're dying, you're sacrificing yourself, that self, in order for what? To glorify Him, right? So you're sacrificing that selfishness, you're sacrificing your desires, your wants, fleshly being, and you're allowing that Holy Spirit to work out through you, because you have put yourself to the side, and now you're going to let the Holy Spirit work out to glorify God.
Yeah, I think, again, you guys are both dead on, and it's interesting you say from an Old Testament perspective, usually that meant, again, death. And then Paul used the illustration that he wanted us to be, and he was a living sacrifice. Again, so that we're going to live out that daily sacrificial attitude. And I also think it's cool in these verses, again, the purpose of that, Paul gives us really good insight when he says, because this is true worship. So again, when you think about it from a standpoint of what is worship and what do we consider worship, Paul in this scripture says true worship, things that is pleasing to God, is that we carry out ourselves in a manner of giving a living sacrifice. So again, if anybody says, how can I please God the most? What does he consider the truest form of worship? It's our attitude, again, in death to self and that living sacrifice on a daily basis that benefits others, right? Too, to where, again, it's no longer about Jeff and it becomes more about what I do for others. And so, too, so that we will be able to discern, right? That's another thing, that we can really discern what is His true will. Right? So in order for me to really understand God's will for Jeff, right? And again, not to open up a theological Pandora's box, but God's will for Jeff is the same, but it's also very different than for Kirk, right? Which is the same, but also very different day in and day out, and who he come in contact with. The will for Jeff is different at times than for Kirk. So again, the discernment of what is his true will for Jeff, again, from a very personal perspective, starts from my desire, as you say, and I think you said that well, Kirk, just to die to self, right? Again, just to say, good for you, Kirk. I'm proud of you. So as we die to self, that really starts the process again, even post-salvation, right, as we die to self. But also, from a renewing perspective, it gives us really the designation that this is a continuous thing, right? So again, and we talked about this a little bit in preparation. From you can go back, and one way to measure this, and again, not from a salvation perspective or even how well we're doing, but when you think about it, that as a Christian, the longer that you walk with Christ and the longer that we allow the Spirit to work within us, there should be things within our mind that literally changes. And I can think of things, and you've thought of some things, and you may or may not want to share them, to where I've changed my mind as a result of my walk, through the Spirit, again, and nothing that I've done. I don't know if you guys have anything like that you want to mention, but there's certain things, again, in my mind that from my perspective too, I know there's no doubt that there's a God, right? There's no doubt that there's a Spirit, because there's literally things that I used to think this way, and wasn't necessarily looking to change my mind, because I thought I was right. Again, my mind was made up of, hey, I've got this right, I think, till I finally figured out, you know what, I think I had that wrong. And that had to be God-inspired, Spirit-led, right? You had mentioned one thing. Do you want to share that, or you want to?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly, but what jumped to mind for me is I knew I was saved, and like you said a minute ago, it doesn't make me any closer or farther away from salvation. But before, I kind of wanted to come to church and be around, just like you were saying early on. I want to be around like you guys. I think we kind of the same makeup, and not that I didn't want the others, but to be honest, if I thought going to church, I wanted to be around those people. And now I honestly really think it would be cool, like you were talking about the diversity. If we had the church full of a lot of people that I really didn't see eye to eye with, I think that's what church is. You know, we had in that Sunday school lesson, if we don't mix it up with the people that are lost, how's anybody going to get found? So
We may want to clearly define mix it up with too.
well, you know,
Yeah,
but
I know what you
you were
mean.
saying
Interact.
about church, I hope they're. I wish they would be here and come there. So,
And it's fun, you know, we have the class in the gym, and it's a very different class. And again, we miss everybody. Again, at some point, we got to throw Cindy out, and somebody's got to comment on Cindy. She was the
Cindy
first one to text me about, hey, it's Big Mouth, because I threw her straight under the bus. Anyway, and Cindy's a great example, literally, of walking this faith out
No doubt.
humbly. You know, helping people, very generous, kind of behind the scenes. So she walks this out. But we
Mike
have
as well.
Mike
Behind the scenes always, but if you listen and hear what's going on, that they help so much, and Cindy's awesome. We're pretty tight. She can't stand anyone to say her name, and it started in here. Brother Dinkins' class was in here, and she sat in the back, and he would invariably call on her or say something about her, and she'd try to crawl under the seat, but
So
she's
you
awesome.
kept
Mike
up
as
that
well.
thought, and then it rubbed off on me, I guess.
Yeah,
more or
and
less.
you give her a little bit of
But
hard time.
you know, we teach the class in the gym, and Kirk had made the statement that, you know, I wish that people would be afraid to come to the gym class. He said, I wish you'd say, hey, you go down. That's a rough group they got. Have you seen the folks that bring into the gym class? And he says it kind of jokingly. At the same time, that would be an awesome thing if we could, you know, get those folks that so desperately need it and are looking for things, you know, involved in church. And honestly, I think that's where at times we have to go to them. But anyway, you know, that's a good mindset. Although I don't know again that we want to accomplish all of that at one time. But it is a great thought.
Yeah.
You know, when you go back and you look again, I guess it's 3 through 9 again. Paul begins talking in chapter 12. He begins talking about kind of the spiritual gifts and, you know, what is basically prophecy or preaching. You guys correct me if I'm wrong. You got service, you know, or helping, exhortation, encouragement, giving, leadership, or really kind of helping those that may not be as fortunate as you, and then mercy, which again, you know, mercy. Without mercy, where the whole thing kind of loses its course and its teeth. But and that's vitally important. But then verse 9 is kind of where we pick back up, and it's really again, I think almost 20 specific actions that we need to take, right? In order, Paul gives us an example, okay, hey, you want to see what a living sacrifice is, what that means is do these things. And it's funny, and we've talked about a little bit before we even started, is that he opens up with, you know, love without being hypocritical. You know, don't love via hypocrisy. And we've kind of had a fun time of what exactly you think Paul meant from that, because again, it's interesting to me, if you think about it, how can you truly love, right? How can you have a genuine love and it be hypocritical? But that's the thought. And then he follows up with that in the fact that we want to make sure that we detest, that we hate, that we despise evil, right? And so again, we also want to talk about what does that really mean? And then one thing I want to make sure that we wrap up with some examples, and you know, who's the best example but Christ himself, of how did he love without being hypocritical, and how did he demonstrate, you know, despising evil, and blend those two together. But again, I think it's an interesting topic when you think about, again, in the church in the year 2020, how might we be guilty? And again, it's easy for me and you, we probably need to rephrase this differently. You know, how is Kirk guilty? How is Jeff guilty of loving, and at the same time being hypocritical? And do we really have a firm grasp of what it means to detest evil? Does that make sense? Because I think it really starts with those two, and then everything else. It was kind of funny, you know, as you go down and you read everything. It reminded me a little bit of Bill and Ted, because verse 18 really just says, you know, be excellent to everybody. You know, if you remember that, you know, just be excellent to everybody. And if we could literally live that out.
That's something adventure.
Bill and Ted's Adventure. Yeah.
Excellent adventure.
Yeah. So Bill and Ted.
Bill and Ted.
You'll catch on, Kirk.
Yeah, I
Right?
got it.
Read your notes, Kirk, that we went over from it before we started. But again, when you think about it again, how do you think that even, again, I'm talking about people that are dedicated to the Lord, people that want to be a living sacrifice. How at times do we make the mistakes? How have we personally made the mistake of loving while at the same time maybe being a little bit hypocritical about it? Or maybe not having a perfect grasp on detesting evil. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. I tell you, that's a $1 million question, the love without hypocrisy. And the only thing that I have, before we started, I've tried to wrap my brain around this, and I think the only thing that I can think of really that makes sense to me, and I'd encourage you guys to really think about this, because it's a lot there. Love without hypocrisy, hypocrisy being the opposite, of whatever, they call all Christians hypocrites, right? Because anyway, that's a whole other subject. But all right, so I think it's anytime selfishness comes into love, because I think we all can agree the selfishness is just hard to suppress. Man, like you said earlier, man, selfishness will come in the scene and it's disguised. You didn't even know it was there. And I think for me, that true love is a love that doesn't even consider you. Or yourself. Because it's a love that only considers the other person. I think that's the only way for it to not be hypocritical, whether you're not loving just so that you can get that side angle of something that you would like to have or whatever. No, you're truly loving because I want the best for you with nothing to do with me. Oh, that's the best I can do with it.
No, I think that's great. Kirk, what's your thoughts?
Along the same lines, instead of using the word hypocritically, conditionally, you always hear this in all those songs, love without condition. That's hard. Same thing, like you said, that's tough for me. I would want to say that I don't, but there's like a condition in everything for me, and I wish it wasn't that way. But I know Philip's right when he says it's kind of a hard one, like you always say, to get your arms around. If you really think about it, sometimes I don't think real deep, and you help me with that with things. But we talked a little bit last night about that, and I thought too. And then when you said you came in here, you said, I've thought about that more and I'm not real sure. So that's just a tough one. I know it's a whole lot easier to say it than to do it. So.
Well, and I think too, why this is so important, going back again to the renewing of our minds. And Paul even talked about it all the way back in chapter 7 when he was talking about that he wouldn't have known, and again, you guys help me right quick. Basically, what's the word I'm looking for? He didn't know it was a sin to want something that someone else has. Coveting, right. He didn't know what coveting, really that it was a sin until he was told, and then he started coveting things left and right? So it pointed out, and so I think when you think about it from that perspective, is the first thing you have to mentally say, is my attitude right or wrong, right? And so when we start renewing our mind, we have to take a step back to say the things that I'm most sure about, are those based on my impression? Again, and we need to take a step back too, because we skipped over one of the most important things, or I skipped over it. It's really about that we want to be transformed from this world and conformed, by the Spirit. So it gives us the impression again that it's so easy in this world. We're surrounded by it, we grow up in it. And it's almost a habit, right, of how we think and what culture says. And even folks, again, spiritual people that say, well, that was probably an okay reaction based on what happened. Where the scriptures would say, that probably wasn't an okay reaction, even though that is what happened. So it's not something that's easy. And again, it's not something that we can do on our own, but through the Spirit. And you think about that, it's really an attitude from a standpoint of, the love that you mentioned that totally removes us, right? And so then when you think about it from a detest evil, for despise evil, and you think about those that you mentioned that at times may be outside of our comfort zone, right? And we look at it even from the standpoint of they're not going to accept the message. Look at their lifestyle. And again, it's that we're not focused on the fact that they're blind, right? We're focused more almost on the actions instead of the spirit that they're under. Is not a spirit of light, it's a spirit of darkness to drive us to have a love for them, right? And that's so difficult even for church folks, And again, I think that our message and our mission is as we become more and more and more experienced in our faith, true to our faith, it really becomes then the goal to help others in that, what's the word that I'm looking for now? Discipleship, that we can disciple and mentor those around us. And again, that we have a true desire for the renewing of our minds, right? And you look at it, we talked about a little bit, looking at an example of how this played out. And the one example, and Kirk's heard me say this a lot, when you think about it, Satan attacks people really one of two ways. Christians, one of two ways, post-salvation. And he basically comes and says, Phillip, you are so good. If more people could be like you, boy, we'd all be better off, right? Or he says, Kirk, and hey, it's amazing how that worked out. Or he goes, Kirk, you are so pathetic. I don't know how I don't know why God loves you. You just need to stay in the shadows. You have no chance, right? And people buy into one of those two theories. They either think, man, I'm doing really, really good. Or, man, I don't get this at all, right? And so both of them, again, it's one of those to where from a renewing of the mind, again, to as you said, die to self. So again, it doesn't really matter how good I am. It really doesn't matter how bad I am, right? It's about the Spirit and my ability then to receive that and then to love those around me, not focus on, hey, am I good enough to do that? Just love them. None of us are good enough to do that, right? None of us are good enough to do that. And you think about from Jesus' perspective, and I always think about the adulteress, right? She's literally caught in the act of adultery. They bring her to Jesus. And by the law, she's guilty. She's guilty. And again, I think about it from the standpoint of it's really more about the attitude that Jesus had. Right? Because I think that he really had a heart for her. It wasn't so much that, hey, you know what, I'm so mad at the Sadducees and Pharisees and they're trying to put me in a spot that I'm going to let you off the hook. I think he literally looked at her as someone that he loved and had compassion for, had a heart for, wanted to show mercy for, right? And so again, we look at that example, and boy, if we could follow that, right? And again, the mob because again, the church elect was right. She deserved the punishment they were going to get. But imagine, again, if the three of us as the church elect stood up for somebody who, they're dead to rights, wrong in what they're doing. And a lot of people in 2020 wanted to stone them, so to speak, right? And we stood up and said, no, wait a second. None of us are perfect, guys, right? And really stood up in front of even the religious elect and that mob mentality of that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. It is wrong, right? But imagine what we might accomplish if that was our thought. And to take it a step further, when you literally think about Jesus on the cross, right? And again, and we talked about this a little bit because my mentality, and Kirk was talking about, his mentality too would have been, when I get off this cross, one of these days, you're going to have to come back and see me again. And boy, I'm going to remember you. You were the one that you thought you got away with hitting me from behind, but you really didn't. I know exactly who you are, and I know you're not changing. You just wait for a few years because you got to see me again. That's how I would have looked at that, right?
And he says, please forgive me.
And again, and his attitude was one of those, again, of, Father, forgive them.
Yeah.
And that's probably easy for Phillip. That may be easy for Kirk. I can't do that at all.
No, that's a tough one.
And it may be tough for you too, right? And I think too, the message is that's tough for all of us, right? And it should be more about how we come together in that struggle, the realization of that struggle, again, with the goal to somehow just let's move a little bit. Let's just move a little bit. And do I need to change my mind a little bit of how I see the wrong in others? Am I more apt to stone somebody? Not literally, right? Or am I more like to step in front of the mob and say, yeah, they're wrong, but I've got a heart for them, and I really wish you'd have a heart to, even though that they may end up being wrong again tomorrow, right? And you have an interesting take, or I think it's an interesting take too. You talk about, Paul, and you correct me if I'm wrong, or if I make this come more extreme than you had it. But Kirk has always said, as a church person, right? He saw Stephen as almost kind of a brother Rufus, or somebody that you'd want to stand up for and protect. He said, if I came around the corner and they had stoned brother Rufus and Saul was responsible for that, that'd be trouble. You know, and Kirk, your point was, I would think, hey, the thing that God would want me to do was to eliminate Saul, so he wouldn't eliminate other Christians.
Yeah.
So Kirk would proudly take it upon himself to say, hey, yeah, send Saul my way. I'll take care of that for all of us, right?
I feel like Kirk would do that.
And I think he probably could handle the task too. But again, I think, you know, when we talked about the renewing of our mind, you've kind of came to the conclusion of, look what would happen if someone had done that, right?
We wouldn't have Paul.
You wouldn't have Paul. You wouldn't have that transition. But how many church folks? Let's just say literally that they stoned Brother Rufus. And Brother Rufus probably hates this story. He probably always said, "Why are y'all always talking about me being the one that's getting stoned?" But you know, imagine that they've stoned one of our fellow church members, right? They've stoned them. How many church people would stand up? They say, "Hey, old Kirk found that guy. That guy won't be stoning anybody else. Good for old Kirk." You know, and a lot of us would have the mentality of, praise the Lord, Kirk was able to get to that guy and stop him, right? But when we've stopped him, you know, what have we done? Not only from a standpoint of we would have limited, right, the world's benefit of having Paul, right? But we would have also ended Paul's ability to become Paul. Even if you take away the whole, hey, the world would have lost out, even if it was just Saul lost out, right? And again, I think that's from a standpoint, if we can start carrying that out, I think that's the overall message that Paul was trying to relate to us. Again, that it was so important for us to be secondary to other people, that we should love them first, we should love them for their needs, again, based on the mercy that we received is the mercy that we should pass along. And again, I think if we're really all open and honest, that's not easy. You know, even where we are, that's not easy. And I think that's why it's so important that we have, you know, people that we can bond with and sit with and talk with and share with, to where we can then go out and do something that's not always an easy task to undertake out in the world. And again, I think that's kind of the message, at least through these verses, that Paul was intending. Any thoughts from you guys, kind of as we wrap up chapter 12?
Real quick on your example of the adulteress, and they were going to stone her. I thought that was a great example I thought about last night. To me, the most powerful part or the lesson there is when he says, okay, let's stone her. And then everybody's gearing up to do it, and he says, whichever one of y'all are without any sin and you're perfect, you cast the first one. And then I could see me being in the group, maybe not to stone the adulteress, but say it was Saul, I'd be the one I'd want him first, you know. And then when somebody says, since you're so perfect, you know, and then I just think, to me, that's the lesson there for me. And then it makes you stop. So I thought that was an awesome example. One other thing I thought of, not to try to blow smoke up Phillip's skirt, but when you were talking about a living sacrifice, I don't know that much about Phillip, but my wife said he had an awesome job, made a ton of money, and was really somebody. And he left that to come here to minister to the kids and all that. You know, I don't know if that falls under like what a lot of people think of as a sacrifice, but to me, I thought of that. I wanted to put that plug in. And then one other quick thing. In all of the things you were talking about, for me, I wrote this down as a overview of the verses that were skipped in the Sunday school book. We kind of skipped 3 through 8. We went 1 and 2 and then into 9. But the summary that I read, I didn't write this, but I read this. It says, our spiritual gifts emerge when we display a right attitude toward others. I thought that was just an awesome way, and you know the way it sounds, I didn't come up with that, but I found that in a study guide. And then all that you were saying about others and the things that Phillip said, I just kept thinking it was kind of neat. Those were the verses that we skipped, but that tied everything all together. So,
Yeah. Well, Kirk, thanks for you. It wasn't. You probably glorified it maybe a little bit more than you should have. But it, by the world standard, it may have been a sacrifice. But by spiritual standards, just the obedience. I've been blessed beyond anything I could have ever imagined. So I have, by that, God has given me where it's not really been a sacrifice, it's been a true blessing. So, but thank you.
good for you.
One thing I want to say, and this, I got spiritual, you ever had a Holy Spirit body slam? And I'm not being, have you ever had the Holy Spirit just body slam you where you was wrong? Well, I had it on this subject, so I just want to share this in case, maybe it'll help somebody, just one person. I pray that you don't have to be body slammed about this. We can't expect a non-believer to conduct themselves as a believer.
Mm-hmm.
Why in the world? I don't know why I do that, and I just think somebody who's steeped, as you kind of mentioned, who's steeped in sin. Well, how do they not see that? Well, they don't have the Holy Spirit in them.
Right.
They're not a believer. Why are we even expecting a standard to be met, by that person? And so when you talked about the adulteress, was she a believer? Was even adultery a big thing to her? If she's not a believer, she has no conviction, right? She has no conviction. And like Stephen, he says, don't lay this sin on them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we always, just with evangelism, discipleship, our last commandment, the Great Commission, we have to be open-minded when we are surrounding ourselves, when we are going out, when we're around sinful people. We're all sinful, non-believers, let me say that. We can't expect them to be acting a certain way without Jesus Christ. And so we have to share that first and let the Holy Spirit do the work. So all I'm saying is, do not let somebody's attitude without Christ discourage you from sharing Christ with them.
That's a good point.
And so, because I'm telling you, I took a beating over it because I was doing it. I was expecting someone to act a certain way, didn't have Christ, and I was getting upset about it. And the Holy Spirit's like, what do you do? And I thought, wow, I never thought about it like that. I'm expecting somebody to know something that doesn't know it, right? And that's not fair, is it? It's not fair for me to give you a differential equation exam today, is it, if you've never taken the class?
You going to take a differential equation exam today, Kirk?
I better pass.
Okay.
That's right. Well, none of us would pass that exam without saying. So I digress. That's all I had to say on that.
Well, first let me say thank you for joining us just at the very last second. I know this has been a little bit different. I hope that, again, that you've gotten something, if nothing else, really to go back to the scriptures and really kind of take a step back and say, God, where am I mentally? What areas of my life maybe do I need to have a renewal and become closer to you? And I just want to thank you for joining us. Again, we're all looking forward to getting back where we can worship corporately. Again, happy Mother's Day to everybody. And I will say, on the way over here, Kirk, I thought this would be the first time that the two of us would have a combined IQ of the average person in our class. I thought, well, Hillary's going to be there, right? But luckily, you came in and joined us. So now then we may have qualified.
Triple digits.
You've more than doubled our over
IQ.
IQ.
No. I think we're triple digits together.
Maybe. All three of us, right? I tell everybody, Greg and I, they talk about the ACT. And I tell everybody, I said, well, I don't know what the big deal is. Me and Greg made 28 on our ACT. He made a 14 and I made a 14. We made 28. What's the big deal, right? And again, everybody, thank you. Again, enjoy Mother's Day. Have a great, wonderful day. And again, Hillary, thank you for recording it. It's been a pleasure. And we look forward to seeing everybody soon.